Good morning and welcome to Morning Movie News, where we have a very interesting set of news stories today which focus on a single individual, and that's Jeff Robinov. Remember good old Jeff Robinov? He not only used to head up film production at Warner Brothers before he ended up being edged out of the company when Kevin Tsujihara got the top creative job at the entire studio, but he kind of is well known to be on the trailer viewers because he has always stopped for an interview with myself on the Warner Brothers red carpets when he was with the studio. I could always rely on Jeff to stop. A really awesome individual, and he fostered relationships with talent. That was kind of his calling card. And talent relationships that are largely still in effect today, even after he left the studio. I think the only exception potentially is Christopher Nolan, but I think Nolan hasn't totally closed the door on Warner Brothers either. But Ben Affleck, Zack Snyder, Baz Luhrmann to some degree, we're going to talk about Baz as well. All of these are people that Jeff Robinov brought to Warner Brothers and kept there. Alright, so it'll be interesting to see how he factors into each story here. Alright, so the first story is actually about another studio executive, and that's Amy Pascal. Big news yesterday as we have our first clear casualty from the Sony hack. It had seemed that Sony had risen triumphant from that very sticky situation, getting the interview in theaters after all, doing solid business on demand, and considering everyone said the interview was not a good movie, I think it kind of looked a little bit like a win for Sony at the end of the day. But not so for Amy Pascal. As they often do in corporate situations, they let some time pass, and then the other shoe drops. They don't want to create, more drama. They don't want to add to the developing story, so they give us some time to breathe. And then as an afterthought, the hammer drops, as I said, the other shoe. So Pascal is leaving, but it doesn't seem like it's on horrible terms because she's in some ways staying with Sony. Now, when Jeff Robinov left Warner Brothers, he had to go and start his own production company elsewhere and look for funding elsewhere because Warner Brothers and he did not part on good terms, largely because Kevin Tsujihara, I would think, didn't want someone around who wanted his job. So, but Amy Pascal, she's going to stick around. She's getting her own production shingle as well, and it's going to be based at Sony. Sony will finance her projects for the next 4 years. They will have, of course, a first look at distributing them. I'm sure if they're financing them, they'll definitely want to distribute them. And they'll also give her an office, at least for the first year, on their Culver City lot. So that seems like a pretty nice breakup. That's like, we're getting divorced, but we're still going to live in the same house for the sake of the kids. It's like a Sony sitcom. So I think the big question is, did Amy Pascal deserve to be fired? Well, I think you have to think about why she probably was fired. She actually was not fired. She decided to resign, which is a nice way to be fired, where they say, we'd like you to resign because then you can tell everybody it was your decision and it was time to go and we'll give you this nice production deal, or you can insist on staying and we'll just fire you. So the reasoning is one. I think the most obvious one is she greenlit an extremely volatile film, The Interview, which led to all the problems that they had. Now, there's theories that it's an inside job, that someone just framed North Korea for the hack, because it was a disgruntled former female employee who used to work largely in their technology department. That's a very interesting story. That's a movie waiting to happen. But nevertheless, it was a real Achilles heel for the studio. So there's that dilemma that she, had the bad judgment to greenlit a film that she felt was, potentially damaging enough that they did screen it for the State Department. The State Department's like, hey, it's not our fault that we said it was okay to release and this happened to you. At the end of the day, it's your responsibility. At the end of the day, it's Amy Pascal's responsibility. But I think that the real reason, I don't think anybody would actually be fired. If I had to guess, you never know. It's at the discretion of those involved at Sony to make whatever decision they want. But for creative freedom, that seems like not a great reason to fire someone. Nope, I think it's because of those leaked emails. And so, really, honestly, Amy Pascal has no one to blame but herself because even though somebody leaked those emails, she wrote them in the first place. And I think the emails showed a couple of things. I think they showed someone who, said some pretty inappropriate remarks about the president and just seemed to, not be particularly socially sensitive in general. So I think that's really bad. Someone who said really horrible things in writing about talent that works with the studio, like Angelina Jolie, big talent for Sony. So I think that a lot of people were upset with, Kevin Hart, also angry. So you had a whole bunch of very high-level celebrities who who are now suddenly upset with Sony and maybe didn't want to work there. So I think that's one reason they also were like, we better get rid of these people that are rubbing the top talent that we need in our movies the wrong way. And also just shows spectacularly poor judgment to go behind people's backs in a not so secretive manner, dissing them to other people in the same industry. So there's that problem. And then also there's the way I think she handled the situation with Scott Rudin and ended up getting the Jobs movie, the Steve Jobs movie written by Aaron Sorkin, bumped over to Universal because she was, fighting so hard for Cleopatra, really hemming and hawing, not being a decisive leader. Basically all the horrible leadership qualities that one often associates with women and why it's still to this day hard for women to get a job. And so Amy Pascal, thanks a lot. So I think considering all those elements together, how could you keep someone like that aboard? Someone who's toxic to the community, someone who can't lead and is difficult and unable to get things done, and someone who greenlit a movie that was again a real liability for the company. Now, what does this have to do with Jeff Robinov? Besides them both leaving, well, she had the top post. She was like the equivalent pretty much of Kevin Tsujihara. So that's a very big difference. She has the job at Sony that Robinov wanted at Warner Brothers. But he might get it at Sony. Because lo and behold, who's on the short list to take over for Amy Pascal? But Jeff Robinov. That would be fantastic. And one has to wonder if the talent relationships that he's had from before might suddenly follow him to Sony. Very interesting development. I'm rooting for him, as I said. I think he's a really swell guy. All right, so that's the first story of the day. Now, what else? How does Baz Luhrmann connect to Jeff Robinov? Well, as I said, Jeff Robinov and Baz Luhrmann have a very good relationship, and Jeff Robinov did a lot to keep him at Warner Brothers while he was there during his reign. But The Great Gatsby wasn't a fantastic film for either of them. Now, I loved The Great Gatsby. It was one of my favorite films ever. I thought it was extremely well done, really inventive, and it actually did very well at the box office, over $300 million worldwide, and Baz Luhrmann's most successful film to date. However, that damn soundtrack really ended up, shooting him in the foot, because I think that while the film did well financially, and I liked it, I think that overall the reputation of it is not a good one. People really did not like the Jay-Z music choices. I thought they were inspired. But, at the end of the day, even though I also like Speed Racer, and that's not doing the Wachowskis any favor. At the end of the day, especially in a business that deals with mass markets and, mass sales you can't just sell to one, like fine art. If one person likes your painting, you're great. But, here in movies, a number of people have to like what you're doing. And that's just simply not the case with The Great Gatsby. So that film, I think, actually, even though, ironically, it is Baz Luhrmann's most successful film to date, it's a bit of a black eye for him creatively. So, like so many people, he is going to go and refresh his creative juices over on Netflix. Like another Warner Brothers favorite, the Wachowskis, they are also going to Netflix, and they are also in need of a kind of like a refresher in terms of their creative reputation. So Netflix seems to be the place to go. It's like a creative reputation rehab, but let's see if it can deliver for both these individuals. So what's Baz Luhrmann doing? This was a big announcement yesterday, and he is going to do like a hip-hop show, a drama that has a lot of music in it, of course. That's what Baz Luhrmann does. And he's taking his whole creative team, including his wife, fantastic creative designer, won many an Oscar when he did not for the films they've done. And they're going to do something called The Get Down. And it takes place in 1970s New York. It's going to have an urban cast. I'm sure it will be diverse, but they're going to go, I think, for that demographic. And we'll discuss why in a moment. But it's 1970s New York, and it's going to follow a bunch of teenagers from the South Bronx singing on the streets, spray painting, doing all that stuff that you've seen in a lot of music videos on MTV. And then it's going to chart their rise of success. And they're going to go from the South Bronx to Soho, the art scene, to they say the skyscrapers of Manhattan, including the just-built World Trade Center, all these different elements of New York at this time in the 1970s. They also say they're going to highlight Studio 54, CBGB, a really famous music club, obviously, that only recently was closed down, and really try and paint a picture of that period in time, and in particular in New York City. Now, teaming up with him is someone who's very good at some gritty aspects of storytelling, and that's The Shields. Let me get his name right. The Shields. Sean Ryan. Sean Ryan, that's the name of the creator there. He's going to help Baz Luhrmann put this show together, again, for Netflix. And I think that this is interesting because the 1970s really haven't been explored in popular culture lately except for that 70s show, which was a Fox sitcom. And that's a very different look than the way these periods are explored today. It's a popular thing right now to time jump. You see two sitcoms on ABC. They have the Goldbergs in the 1980s and Fresh Off the Boat, focusing on the Wong family from the 1990s. And of course, Mad Men famously chronicled the 1950s and 60s. So the 1970s is something that hasn't got attention in this kind of highbrow aesthetic. So I think it's a very good choice when you consider like the Jackson 5 and other music groups from that time period. I think it has a distinct feel, and I think it could be really exciting to explore. I guess also Boogie Nights would perhaps be the best equivalent of highbrow exploration of the 1970s. And that turned out pretty well for everyone involved. So we'll see if The Get Down can be that level of quality. Now, I said there was another reason that Netflix probably was excited about this property that didn't have anything to do with Baz Luhrmann or even Sean Ryan from The Shield or even the 1970s. And that's the success of Empire on Fox. I don't know if you've been following this story, but this is a fascinating situation that's going on right now in the television industry. Empire, Lee Daniels and Danny Strong created this. They're, of course, the team behind The Butler, a fantastic film starring Forrest Whitaker. Oprah Winfrey was involved, totally ignored by the Oscars, but it made a boatload of money. So they got this television show with Brian Grazer, Ron Howard's producing partner, executive producing, and it debuted on Fox. Basically, it's a black version of, say, Dynasty or Dallas, which, when you think about it, is genius. And that genius is coming true in the ratings. Empire is a huge hit, and even more so, Empire is a show that people watch live, which is incredibly valuable to the network because that means people are watching the commercials when they air. And so that's very valuable. And in fact, it's been reported that Empire is the first show in 21 years to be a hot drama that actually increases its live ratings as the season continues. That's amazing. And 21 years is a lot longer than the advent of the DVR, at least the popularity of it. So I think that's a fascinating development, and it's really, opening the eyes to television industry executives because they see a very underserved market, which currently has shows like the Shonda Rhimes shows over on ABC, How to Get Away with Murder, and also Scandal. That's what it's called, Scandal. And then, of course, Blackish, which I actually enjoy quite a bit. But Blackish actually has the lowest percentage of black viewers, which is interesting considering, how many are tuning in for the other shows. And in fact, Empire's audience is 2/3 black. But that still means 1/3 of the audience is not black. So that's also, I think, a big step forward as well. So I think that people see that this is a place to really get some eyeballs, and I think Netflix also wants to capitalize on that as well. So that's the second story of the day. Now, the third story of the day, what else about Jeff Robinov? Well, he did start that production company, Studio 8, and he is partnering to help produce Ang Lee's upcoming next film, which is looking to cast its lead. Now, Ang Lee, of course, incredibly successful director, very celebrated, and also always on the cutting edge of technology. That served him well. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, involved a lot of interesting wire work, etc. Then, of course, The Life of Pi, very creative film, beautiful use of 3D and just technology in general, special effects. I believe Rhythm and Hughes infamously won the Oscar for Best Visual Effects while bankrupt, having to declare bankruptcy. Very interesting situation. But Ang Lee's like, hey, you know what? I'm not going to turn away from technology because of a few bad experiences. So he's doing an adaptation of a book called, it's a really weird title, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk. And the way he's going to utilize technology here is he's going to utilize not only a 3D camera to shoot this in 3D, that's not going to be changed, in post-production, but he's also going to do high frame rate. So you're going to see an ultra high frame rate 3D experience to tell the story of a group of soldiers, Bravo Company, and one 19-year-old in particular, Billy Lynn, who managed to survive a battle in Iraq only to have it captured on news cameras. So they become kind of celebrities, as so happens in today's news culture. So they're brought back to the U.S. for kind of a promotional tour. And one of the things they have to do is to appear during the halftime show on a big football game on Thanksgiving. Not the Super Bowl, but a Thanksgiving Day football game. And the book and the movie takes place during the course of one day, game day, with flashbacks to show what happened during that battle and the bravery of the title character, Billy Lynn. So Ang Lee wants to use all this technology to have the audience fully experience the emotions and sensations of soldiers, both on the battlefield and when they return home. Kind of like, I guess you could say, taking American Sniper and combining it with Saving Private Ryan, right? With a little bit of heart. I mean, those films definitely have heart as well, but, even more, perhaps even more so on its sleeve. Now, of course, Saving Private Ryan and American Sniper now are the most successful war movies of all time, so not a bad mashup. So who is Ang Lee considering for the lead? He wants an unknown, and the word is that he wants to surround that unknown with known talent. And I think that's really commendable, although I have to say, his unknown talent isn't that unknown. He's not like doing an open casting call, just someone who isn't a name draw. So he's narrowed it down to 4, and I'd be curious to who you guys think is the best choice. One is Taron Egerton from Kingsman: The Secret Service. I've seen that movie. I can't believe that he's not being cast everywhere. I think Bryan Singer will come to regret not casting him as Cyclops, and I think that Ang Lee might come to regret not casting him here. But let's see who else he's considering. But this would be my pick, Taron Egerton. And my Kingsman review is embargoed, but it will be coming out next week, of course, because the movie does as well. But then also Jack Rayner from Transformers 4, Age of Extinction. I didn't like him in that movie. I thought he brought nothing to the table. That was the Mark Wahlberg show, as it should be. But Jack Rayner didn't even hold a candle to Wahlberg. Joe Cole from Peaky Blinders. That's the show that Tom Hardy produces. It stars Cillian Murphy, and I think it's available on Netflix. I tried to start watching it, but I could not do it. So I don't know how he is on the show because I haven't seen him on it. And then also Billy Howell from the UK TV show Glue. So it sounds a little bit like Glee, but if anybody watches any of those shows, particularly Peaky Blinders and Glue, are either of those actors a star in the making? All right, so those are the 3 stories of the day, all thanks to Mr. Jeff Robinov. I hope he's doing well. I'm glad to see him rebounding so strongly. It would be very interesting if he got that Sony gig. He would really transform the studio. He ran Warner Brothers in a very distinct way, not quite the way Amy Pascal ran Sony. But it didn't work, obviously, because she had to leave. So let's go on to the viewer question, which comes from Irian42. Irian, frequent commenter. I'm sure you've seen the avatar with the pink skull cap on the little head. Very noticeable. I see the comments for the first 24 to 48 hours for a video, so I really can come to notice some people's avatars. So it's fun. It's kind of like I know you guys. So Irian42 says, Grace, question. How can actors sign on for a franchise role without having a script or even a director or a writer, which seems to be the standard at the moment? Isn't that a huge gamble, locking yourself into a multiple movie deal without knowing anything about it? It most certainly is, Irian42, but it is, as you said, the common practice. Now, an interesting bit of advice is that often people want to change the way a big organization works, but I think it's almost impossible to do that unless you do it from the inside. And then also, ironically though, once you get in the inside, you start to see why it operates the way that it does. And this is just something I think that isn't going to change probably ever, especially with franchise filmmaking. It's just a sad reality of it. It's something I had to realize myself. I'll never forget it. I was doing a story on a movie, I'd say maybe a few years ago at this point. And I was talking about an Asian actor trying to change the way Hollywood cast. And I said, well, he'd be better off succeeding in the more stereotypical roles and then trying to change it afterwards. And I was like, what? If I'm giving that advice to that gentleman, I should take the same advice myself. So interesting, bit of advice there. And I would say that would be what I would say in terms of this. I'd say it's all well and good to say, I refuse to sign for a franchise until you sign up a writer and a director. But then the studio will just say to you, then we'll just sign someone else. And you'll be like, damn it! I stood for something and ended up getting nothing. Well, that other individual who had no problem going with the flow is now the star of a major franchise. So I think it's not too much of a risk, for instance, if you go over to, let's say, Marvel, because they have a really good setup there. So I think that's less of a risk. And so if you sign on to a franchise that so far is doing pretty well, like let's say the X-Men, like let's say they're doing an X-Men spin-off movie, and they're like, do you want to be part of the X-Men universe? We don't know who's going to write your movie. We don't know who's going to direct it. Kind of like Channing Tatum with Gambit to some degree. But they go, Bryan Singer's going to oversee it. We're on fire with X-Men Days of Future Past. Who would say no to that, right? So I think that you kind of have to trust the team. Now, the other situation is that unfortunately, even if a movie isn't that well written these days or that well directed, it can still make a lot of money at the box office. And also, you're only as good as your next project. So if you sign on for, let's say, a huge franchise, and it might end up being a horrible movie. But if you're in a movie that has a lot of eyeballs on it, on the developing story, everybody else is going to want a piece of you going into that. Let's take, for instance, who we just discussed for that Ang Lee movie, Jack Rayner. Why would anybody want to put Jack Rayner from Transformers 4 in a movie? But the thing is, he was in Transformers 4, the most successful movie of 2014 at the box office worldwide, which means a lot of people are familiar with him. So when Ang Lee puts his trailer out, he can say, Jack Rayner from Transformers 4, Age of Extinction. And everyone goes, Oh, I saw that movie. Let's see what this guy's up to now. So that's kind of, another aspect of it. You just want to get that line on your resume. So Hollywood is a weird machine. There are a lot of practices that perhaps aren't in the best interests of anybody. But it's just, at the end of the day, it is a business, and this so far is working. So I don't think anybody's really been burned too much by this. I would say even, for instance, you might say Jupiter Ascending this weekend, but Channing Tatum certainly knew who was writing and directing that movie going into it, and that also didn't work out. I think you never quite know how something's going to work out. I think it's difficult to sign on to something without a script. I think that's perhaps the most worrisome detail here that you mentioned, Area in 42. But, you have in a high concept world for franchises, you know what the movie's basically going to be about. You know the character that it's going to be about. And a lot of times, that's just the most thing that people are most interested in, seeing that character come together. Suicide Squad is an interesting situation because after those individuals signed on, the script continues to change. So they might end up shooting a movie that looks very different than the one they agreed to make. Something Tom Hardy didn't want to do and bailed. So interesting situation. And I think that you have to look at this as something that's in flux, and you can bail if you're Tom Hardy, for instance, and take all the little bit somewhat slightly negative publicity with you, but also take a bit of a hit at the project because somebody bailed on it. I'd say the same goes for Charlie Hunnam dropping out of 50 Shades of Grey, also over script issues, by the way. So Area 42, maybe that's the answer, that you can agree to be in these, but you can drop out if you think it's developing in a really, really poor manner. And I would say those that don't drop out are often the actors who just need the big break, and franchises these days, to save money, often will cast new talent that can't afford to say no to such an opportunity, no matter how little information is given to them at the date of signing. All right, so thank you so much for your question. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Please write down below what you think of today's top 3 stories and the viewer question, anything you'd like to see covered on Monday, and any questions that you might have. Thanks for watching. Bye.